Canaanite, excluding Hebrew. Introduction with text samples in Edomite, Moabite, Ammonite, Phoenician, and Late Punic. Hello and welcome. Shalom Aleichem. Welcome to the Ancient Semitic YouTube channel. And today we're talking about the Canaanite language, which is excluding Hebrew because Hebrew is a little different in terms of how it is attested, and that's why Hebrew has got its video of its own. The last video was in Hebrew. Today I'm going to talk about the other dialects of the Canaanite language, which includes the ones listed on the slide: Edomite, Moabite, Ammonite, and Phoenician. Phoenician includes Punic, and the text samples in this video will be specifically from Late Punic. So let's go and let's have a look at the Canaanite language. So first of all, what is the Canaanite language or the Canaanite languages? I put the S in brackets because, well, you could call it Canaanite languages or dialects of one Canaanite language. What is the difference between a language and a dialect? The oldest question in linguistics. I don't know, but there's no clear line between what is a language and what is a dialect. It's often politically motivated. So I will just refer to Canaanite as a single language here, but also from time to time I might talk about the Edomite language instead of the Edomite dialect without any intention of making any clear distinction. So yeah, you might have heard the phrase, a language is a dialect with a navy, a flag, and a national anthem. That sums it up a little. So yeah, whether I call it the Edomite or Moabite or Ammonite dialect or language is not done intentionally in this video. So Canaanite is a Semitic language. It is a Northwest Semitic language. Now, what is Northwest Semitic? Northwest Semitic, apart from Canaanite, includes also Ugaritic, which I've also done a video on, and Aramaic, which will be the subject of my next video. So Canaanite, Ugaritic, Aramaic are the Northwest Semitic languages, and there are some specific features. I've already mentioned these in my video on Ugaritic, but I can go over these Northwest Semitic features again. So one thing that you find in Northwest Semitic is the initial waw, which became a yod, or you can also say W became Y in Northwest Semitic, which you see usually in verbal and nominal roots, like for example the Northwest Semitic verb yalad, for example yolav in Hebrew, or elev in Syriac, which means to give birth, to beget. In Proto-Semitic this began with the sound w, just like how we still have it in Arabic, walada, or in Ge'ez, walada. Okay, so this does not happen in particles, which is why the word for and is still wa in Northwest Semitic and not ya, but nouns and adjectives and verbs show this phenomenon. Another example would be the word for a month, yarch in Proto-Northwest Semitic, or yoreach in Hebrew, moon or month, which is, for example, in Sabaic and in Akkadian, you have it written with a waw, so warchum in both languages. Actually, in Akkadian, very often it's also written archum, so the wa just was dropped. It did not turn into ya, but in Old Babylonian it's warchum, and same in Sabaic and other non-Northwest Semitic languages, so East Semitic, Central Semitic, etc. Another feature of Northwest Semitic is the pattern of masculine plurals. They very often have the pattern like this, so consonant, a consonant, and the ending una, so the external or sound masculine plural ending. Some examples, for example, the word for dogs. In Proto-Northwest Semitic it would mean something like kalabuna, which shows in Hebrew as kalavin, and in Aramaic as kalvin or kalevin, with a different nasal in the ending. But the point is that masculine nouns, even if they have this specific plural pattern with a between the second and third root consonant, they still add the external masculine plural ending, which, for example, does not happen in Arabic. In Arabic, you say kilabun, with a singular ending and with this fi'al kind of pattern. And if you drop the ending, like in the pausal form or in modern Arabic, it's just kilab. It is not kilabun. That's the point. And it's also not kalbun and not kalabun. Same thing in Ge'ez, where the plural of kalb is aklab. So again, no external nominal or masculine plural ending, and a different internal vowel pattern. So these are two distinctive features of Northwest Semitic. But how is Canaanite different from other Northwest Semitic languages like Ugaritic and Aramaic? I will explain that on the next slide. And here you see some of the distinctive features of Canaanite that set Canaanite apart from Aramaic, and also, as far as we can see, from Ugaritic. Though in Ugaritic it's sometimes a little tricky because of the script that doesn't always represent vowels, but these can more or less safely be listed as distinctive features of Canaanite. So the first one is also probably the most prominent one. It's called the Canaanite vowel shift or Canaanite shift, which means Proto-Semitic long A became O, which is why in Proto-Semitic the word for peace is salamu, but in Canaanite we have shalom. Second feature is the first person singular independent pronoun, anaku in Proto-Semitic, also attested as thus in some other Semitic languages, but anoki in Canaanite. So first of all, we have the Canaanite shift, which is why A became O, but also the vowel in the end became E, probably some kind of vowel dissimilation, so anoki. The next thing is maybe a parallel development to the first person independent pronoun, namely the first person singular suffix on the verb in the suffix conjugation or in the perfect form. So whereas it is tu in most other Semitic languages, qataltu, it became qatalti in Canaanite. The next feature is the shape of the endings for first person plural pronouns. So in Proto-Semitic we had nihnu, ni, na. So nihnu is the independent pronoun, thus nominative. Ni is the genitive form, which means it is attached to nouns. And na is the accusative form, which means it is attached to verbs. So for example, in Proto-Semitic, our dog would have been kalbuni, and he heard us would have been yisma'na. So yisma' in Proto-Semitic was probably the form of the past. Yisma'na, he heard us. And in Canaanite, all three endings became nu. They all became normalized to having an u vowel. So the Canaanite form is nahnu or anahnu, nu, nu. So the genitive would be, for example, in Hebrew, our dog, kalbenu, and he will hear us, yishma'inu. So anahnu, kalbinu, yishma'inu, all with a nu ending. So this didn't happen in all Semitic languages. Like for example, in Arabic, you have nu, na, na. Nahnu, kalbuna, yasma'na. And yet in other Semitic languages like Akkadian and Ge'ez, it looks yet different. This is what it looks like in Canaanite. Next feature is the shape of the geminated stem and the causative stem, or the you can also call it the D stem and C stem, or the PL and HIFIL, or in Arabic terms the form 2 and form 4, so like fa'ala and af'ala. And in Canaanite, so first of all in Northwest Semitic they have the vowel pattern AE, so qatil and haqtil still looks like that in Aramaic. Like in Aramaic it would be qatel and aqtel, and it seems like it also had this vowel pattern in Ugaritic, but in Canaanite we had some kind of vowel harmony, which is why it became qittil and hiqtil, so with two high front vowels. Also, one feature of Canaanite is the infinitive absolute and infinitive construct, the two different forms in the G stem. And the last feature on this list is the relative marker derived from the noun ather, place, which is, for example, what we have in Hebrew when we say asher. And in Phoenician, for example, it is ish or is. Okay, so these are some distinctive features of Canaanite. And to the right, you see a map of Canaanite. It is an approximate map. We don't know the exact borders where these languages were spoken with more precision, and they also changed over time. But based on the ancient kingdoms these languages are associated with, one can more or less safely say that Edomite was spoken in this area, so southern Negev desert and the adjacent parts on the other side of the river Jordan. Moabite, Ammonite, Hebrew in this area. And then to the north along the coast we have Phoenician, and these Canaanite languages were surrounded by other languages, Semitic and non-Semitic, as Old North Arabian, Philistine, which probably was an Indo-European language, maybe Mycenaean Greek, Aramaic to the east, and to the north probably Phoenician probably bordered Luwian and Anatolian Indo-European language. And next we will have a look at each Canaanite language by language, and with each language comes a sample text and some explanations on how to read and pronounce this. But first, the alphabet. So the Phoenician alphabet, in this video I won't do it like in the last videos on Hebrew and Ugaritic with a one individual slide for each letter, so just two short charts. You might probably be familiar with this alphabet already, so just some information. So the first letter, let me call them by the Hebrew names because the Hebrew and Aramaic names are the main sources. I don't think there are any very good sources for the exact pronunciation of the letter names in Phoenician. I think it's mostly constructed based on the Hebrew and Aramaic names of the letters, maybe also the Greek names. So the first one is Aleph, and it was pronounced as a glottal stop, and mostly it only served as a glottal stop and not as a sign for the vowel A in Phoenician, except for then later in Aramaic it took over this function, this vowel letter function, also in Hebrew and also in late Punic. But in the basic form and the original prototype form of the Phoenician alphabet, the letter Aleph was a glottal stop. So Bet was a B sound, Gimel was a G, and Dalet was a D sound, so 3 voice stops. There's no evidence for any kind of post-vocalic spirantization of the Begat Kefet letters, so it was just B, G, D. Next one is He, just a H sound, glottal fricative. Next one is Wow, which originally only served as a consonant, W, and then later in Phoenician it also adopted the function of representing a long vowel U at the end of words, and we also see it used like that in some of the other Canaanite dialects, but it's a later development apparently. Next one is Zai, which is probably pronounced Z in Phoenician and the other languages, with some variation, which you will see in the sample text, especially in Phoenician in this video. Next one is Hate, which apparently had two pronunciations, namely Ha and Ha. We have evidence for this in Old Hebrew and may have also been the case in some of the other Canaanite languages. So it served the function of two letters, apart from Phoenician apparently, which is why Phoenician only had one sign for this and no distinct sign for the Ha sound. But it's possible that at least in Edomite we had this, apart from Hebrew. So Hebrew and Edomite were the two that at least had these two kinds of pronunciation, Ha and Ha. Next one is Thet, which I think there's no consensus on the exact nature of emphasis in these languages, so either an adjective t or a pharyngealized sound t. I think I would maybe prefer the latter, but it's just a shot in the blue. Next one is Yod, which just like Wow has later adopted the second function of serving as a vowel sign for a long E at the end of words. Then we have Kaf, which is a Ka sound, and Lamed, which is an L sound. So see the next letters on the next slide. So next letters, the Mem, which is an M, Nun, which is an N sound, Samek, which was probably also an affricate, so more like Tzamek, tze, tze, tze. The Ayin, which just like the Heid apparently had two ways of pronouncing it, namely A and Ra, so just like Arabic Ain and Rain. Then we have P, which was a P sound. Then we have Sadi, which apparently was some kind of emphatic sibilant or emphatic affricate, so either ta or tsa. Next one is Qop, which again the exact nature of emphasis, there's no consensus on it, so either ka or qa. And in at least one of the languages in this video, namely the quite obscure language of the Deir Alla inscription, it seems like it also represented the Proto-Semitic emphatic lateral, which means it also served as a sign to represent this sound, which was something like kla or kla, or there's many ways to pronounce it, especially if you look at modern South Arabian, which still has this sound, and there's a couple of different ways they pronounce it. Quite mysterious, but with the same thing as well in Old Aramaic. Just the exact nature of this is a little obscure. Next one is resh, so a kind of trilled r sound. The next one also served two functions, still does in modern Hebrew. The letter shin, which in modern Hebrew can be pronounced sheen or seen. So the first one, in terms of Proto-Semitic, it is S1. In Canaanite, not sure what this was pronounced like, either sh or s. And the second pronunciation was lateral, so it was something like sh. Okay, so the two ways of pronouncing this sound were either sh and sh or s and sh. Not sure what to do exactly. I will mostly use sh and sh in this video. Last letter is ta or tau, just a T sound. And then Phoenician also has a word divider, which we see in some of its in some of the Canaanite languages, not in all of them, which is just a dot. Then it also has a sentence divider, which is a small vertical line and some numeral signs, and that's basically it. And anything else that I need to point out, I will do so when we see it, the individual texts in different Canaanite languages that I will present in this video. The first Canaanite language in my video, I want to start from the south and then move upward to the north and then to West Africa or Northwest Africa. The first language is Edomite. It is very fragmentarily attested, so it's mostly ostraka, which is pottery shards that were used to take notes. So no inscriptions or any sophisticated text, just very short texts that are more like notes. These shards are attested from the 6th to the 7th century BCE, or they're dated such, and they're mostly, so this language is associated with the ancient kingdom of Edom, which was probably pronounced Edom in Canaanite or in Edomite. You see it here again in the south, and it is written like all of the languages in this video. It is written in a script that is derived from the Phoenician alphabet, and more specifically this one is derived from Old Aramaic, because the Phoenician alphabet first gave rise to two different sub-varieties of that alphabet, namely Old Hebrew and Old Aramaic, and then Old Hebrew and Old Aramaic in turn developed into several other subtypes of this single Phoenician alphabet, so different styles of handwriting. So Phoenician developed into Old Aramaic in terms of just the alphabet, and then the Old Aramaic alphabet turned into the Edomite script. And because the attestation is so scarce, we don't know all the letter shapes. You see Aleph, Bet, but apparently there's no Gimel in any of those texts, so that's why there's a gap in this picture. And here in the end you see Qof, Resh, Shin, Tav. Okay, let's look at a Edomite text. This is probably the longest preserved Edomite text. It's called the Chorvatuzah Astrakhan, so it's a pottery shard. It was found in a place named Chorvatuzah in the Negev desert. It was some kind of fort ruin, and at least one pottery shard with writing on it was found in there. It's dated to the late 7th or early 6th century BCE, and it was discovered on an archaeological expedition in 1982 and 1983. This is what it looks like though. This is a sketch. It's very idealized, and the original chart is much harder to read, and you can see some problems. There's some cracks that, I guess those cracks aren't the main problem, but the problem is that some of the letters, the ink is rubbed off because it's very old, and you cannot read all of the letters clearly, and there are some places where something is clearly missing, and there's also an incomplete word here, or here I guess, and yeah, so it's fragmentary, the attestation, and yet the fragments that we have are even harder to read. Still, we can read this one. So on the next page I will present to you, first of all, a representation of the text in the Unicode font, and then a transliteration, and then of course a vocalization, because we want to know how to pronounce these words, where to put certain vowels, and then how to translate it. So this is what it looks like in a Phoenician Unicode font with word dividers and everything. There are some gaps where I just left out the signs because we have no idea what they were writing there originally. So the square brackets here are the places where signs are missing. And yeah, we can see the transliteration, and if you know Hebrew especially, you may recognize a couple of things. So the first one, it's like Hebrew Omar, he spoke, and here we have in Hebrew this would be if, the accusative marker, and here we see Asher, so a relative clause. But yeah, let me show you on the next slide how to vocalize and translate this very short text fragment. So this is a vocalization and a translation. Both are based on the work of different authors, and they have different opinions. And yeah, I will maybe mention some of the different opinions on this text. But first of all, let me read the whole thing to you, and then read it bit by bit and maybe explain something. So, Amar li milk, imur li bilbal, hashalom at, wahibriktika li qaus, wa'it tinet ha'ukl, asher immat ach imoh, wahirim uzzi'il al mizbeh. Okay, so these are only 5 lines. The 6th line is too hard to interpret, so I left it out. Okay, it begins with Amar li milk said. And at least one author thinks this should be vocalized Umr li milk, which would be word of li milk. So it's still kind of the same meaning, but formulated in a different way. So it's either Amar or Umr, but nevertheless it is something that this guy named li milk has said. And then it goes Imur, which is the imperative, Imur li bilbal, say to Bilbal. Hashalom at, are you well? Wahibriktika li Qaus, I bless you by Qaus. So Qaus was a deity, a god, and Hibrikti, I bless. You can see the root Beit Resh Kaf, so Baruch or something like that. But in Edomite, it's a hif'il stem or a causative stem, so it's Wahibriktika li Qaus. And then wa'it, now. Tin is the imperative of Natan. So now give it ha'ukl, the grain. Ashr, that, so or which. Imad probably means with, so like Yaim in Hebrew. And in Hebrew, I think, at least in biblical Hebrew, for with me, you sometimes say Imadi. So yeah, there we have this augmented form of the preposition, maybe the original form with a dalet at the end. Imad, and then ach imo is a proper name. Wahirim Uzzi'il, and may Uzzi'il lift it al mizbeh, upon the altar. And so this is what Edomite looks like, what it maybe sounded like, and now you have just witnessed most of the attested corpus of Edomite. Seems a little frustrating, but that's how it is sometimes with these old and obscure languages. Let's go on to the next one. The next one is Moabite, and I have done 2 videos on Moabite, I think 2 videos on the Mesha stele, And again, the measure stele is still the most important text of Moabite. It's basically 90% or more than 90% of the preserved corpus. So apart from the measure stele, which is dated to the 9th century BCE, I think there are just some ostraca and maybe one very short 3 or 4 line inscription. But still, the measure stele is the bulk of the Moabite corpus. So Moabite is associated with the ancient kingdom of Moab, or Moab, which is what it was probably pronounced like. You can see the approximate area of the Moabite language on this map, and it was written in the Old Hebrew script, so another subtype of the Phoenician alphabet, better preserved than Edomite because the text is longer, and it probably preserved the sheen, the lateral sheen pronunciation. And the proof for that is a little weak, but it is a Moabite name, a name that can be identified as being associated with the kingdom of Moab, represented in cuneiform with an L instead of the sibilant. So yeah, it is possible that they still used sheen, just like Biblical Hebrew originally did. So this is the measure stele again, you already know it. So it is an inscription that is dated around 480 BCE, dedicated to King Mesha, who was probably actually pronounced Mosha, and it was discovered in on an expedition between 1886 and 70, and unfortunately it was broken into pieces. It was shattered into pieces after its discovery by Bedouins because there was some kind of dispute with the Ottoman government or with archaeologists. I'm not sure what exactly happened, but basically when it was discovered it was complete, and somebody made a copy, and later it was broken into pieces, and the gray areas on the sketch are basically what is still preserved, and the white areas is what could be reconstructed based on the copies that were made before it was broken into pieces, though those copies are not perfect, and especially on the left edge of the stone they apparently weren't good, so there are some different opinions on how to reconstruct some letters on the right edge here. So yeah, it is far from completely preserved. Still, we can look at least a small part of the text, the first 8 lines. And again, I've done 2 videos on this stele, and again, I have reviewed my vocalization and my pronunciation. I've read some literature on this language and on this inscription and on comparative Semitic, so I changed my opinion on some details of this, and again it sounds a little different than in my old videos. But other than my old videos, this time you can see the transliteration, the vocalization, and I can give you some explanations. So these are the first 8 lines. Yeah, again you see the square brackets indicate what's missing, and very often it's possible to reconstruct what was written there based on that first copy. Sometimes it's not really possible, or it's not really easy to come to a consensus, and here I just left it out. So there's a personal name here starting with Kamosh, which is a deity, so this is the theophoric element of the name, but what comes after that, maybe Kamosh saved him, Kamosh protects him, Kamosh begot him, something like that. We don't know for sure, so I just left that out. You can see word dividers, you can see some vertical lines. These are actually the Unicode signs for the Phoenician numeral sign for the number 1, but I used it as a sentence divider here because that's also what we have in this inscription. Okay, let's look at the vocalization. So I'll read it to you and show you the translation as well. First 4 lines. First of all, I sometimes put this punch sign here, which means, for example, Malakti, so the Mem, Lamed, Kaf are in this line, and the Tau and Yod are actually in the next line. But just I wanted the words to be consistent and not separated, so that's why I transliterated like this. but let me read it to you. Maybe first all 4 lines and then line by line. So, Anok Moshe bin Kamosh Malik Mu'ab Haddaiboni Abi Malak al Mu'ab Shaloshin Shat Wa Anok Malakti Akhr Abi Wa A'shi Habbamat Za'at Likamosh Biqarhah Bamat Ki Hoshi'ani Mikul Hashalakin Wa Ki Hir'ani Bikul Shoni Ai Umri, and actually Umri belongs to the next sentence that is continued in line 5. Okay, so it starts with Anok Moshe bin Kamosh somebody. I am Moshe, the son of whatever his name was. Malk Mu'ab, king of Moab. Haddaiboni, the Dibonite. Abi Malaka al Mu'ab, my father ruled over Moab. Shaloshin Shat, for 30 years. Wa Anok Malakti, and I ruled Akhr Abi, after my father. Wa A'shi Habbamat Zat, and I made this high place Likamosh Biqarha, for Kamosh in Qarha, Bamat something, so a high place of something. We don't know exactly what's missing here. The next line begins with Shin and Ain, so it could have been Bamat Moshe, which wouldn't only mean a high place of Moshe, but the name Moshe also means salvation, so maybe a high place of salvation. Yeah, but again, the original copy is not sufficient there, and the original piece is missing. But why did he make that high place? Ki hoshi'ani mikul hashalakin, because he saved me from all attackers. Wa ki hir'ani bikul shoni ai, and because he made me triumph over all my enemies. And then the next sentence starts with a proper name, Omri. So let's see what's happening with Omri. Omri Malk Yisrael wa ya'annu et Moab yomin rabin ki ya'nub kamosh bi artsuh wa yakhallipuh binuh wa ya'mar gamhu i'annu et Moab bi yomai amar wa ir'ibuh wa bibetuh wa Yisrael abod abad olam wa yirash Omri et kul arts muhdaba wa yishibuh yomuh wa hatsi yomi benuh arba'in shat. Okay, let's do it like chunk by chunk. So Omri Malk Yisrael. Omri was the king of Israel. Wa ya'annu et Moab. He oppressed Moab. Yomin Rabin, for many days. Ki ya'nub Kamosh bi artsuh, because Kamosh was angry with his land. Wa yakhallipuh binuh, and his son succeeded him. Wa ya'mar gamhu, and he also said, I'annu it Moab, I will oppress Moab. Biyomai amar, it was during my days that he said, and then something is missing, probably that he said this, or something like that. Wa ir'ibuh wa bibetuh, I triumphed over him and his house. Wa Yisrael abod abad olam, and Israel perished forever. Wa yirash Omri et kul arts muhdaba. Omri took the whole land of Madaba. So Madaba, just like the town in modern Jordan. Wa yishibuh, and occupied it, yomuh, in his day. Wa hatsi yomi benuh, and in half of the days of his son. Arba'in shat, 40 years. Okay, and this is Moabite. Moabite has a few features that are non-Canaanite, but more like Aramaic. For example, the decades of the numerals, like Shaloshin and Arba'in with a noon ending. This is typical Aramaic, and Canaanite you would normally see Arba'im. But yeah, this is either Aramaic influence or it's just a sign of how these languages were kind of a dialect continuum with other Northwest Semitic languages like Canaanite. So there was maybe at some point there was no clear distinctive border or line of distinction between Canaanite and Aramaic. Okay, so this is Moabite. Let's go on. Let's not read the whole Mesher stele, but instead look at the other Canaanite languages. The next one is Ammonite. It is also fragmentarily attested. The fragments are dated to the 9th till 6th century BCE. It is associated with the kingdom of Ammon or Ammon. The capital was Ammon Rabbath, which is in the same place as the, I think, as the Jordan capital Amman, so also the same name. Okay, you see it here, located in modern Jordan. And just like Edomite, it is written in a script derived from Old Aramaic. The sketch of the script of the alphabet looks a little different than the Edomite, because Edomite is mostly attested through ostraka, and the fragments of Ammonite are inscriptions, so the style of writing looks a little different, even though it's basically the same script. And probably the most famous, or one of the two, I guess, most famous text in Ammonite is the Amman Citadel inscription. So it was found in the Amman Citadel in the capital of Jordan, and it is written on a piece of stone like this, and you see a lot is broken off. It's broken off on both sides, and a lot of letters are rubbed off. So it's kind of eroded, and we can't read anything there. Need to reconstruct a couple of things. It is dated to the late 9th century BCE and was discovered in 1961. So let's have a look at this text, the Amman Citadel inscription in Ammonite. Again, there is an idealized version of the text here in a Phoenician Unicode font and a transliteration, and you can see there's something missing on the beginning and the end of each line. So when I read it, it's not really a coherent text, but more like 8 individual sentences, sometimes not even whole sentences, but sentence fragments. So yeah, maybe because it's not a complete text, I will just read it line by line. So Milkom Bana Laka Maboot Sabibot. Milkom, which is a god, a deity, he has constructed for you the precinct entrances. Ki kul musabbib aleka mot yamutun, that all who threaten you shall surely die. Kahidim wa kul mu'arrib, I shall surely destroy them and all who enter. Wabikul siderot yalinun tzaddiqim, and amidst all its columns the just shall reside. Okay, these are the first 4 lines. Let's look at line 5 till 8. Tadul bidalt bottom, there will hang from its doors an ornament. Tishta'a bibin ulam, something will be offered within its portico. Washalwa, and safety. Shalom laka wa shalom, peace to you and peace, I guess, to somebody else, I don't know, but this is what we've got in the Amman Citadel inscription. And this again is not much, but it is a great part, an important part of the corpus of Ammonite. So we don't have much more. The next language is probably the most obscure one. It doesn't even have a name. It's sometimes just called Deir Alla, or the language of the Deir Alla inscription. So there's only a single inscription, and you see this language isn't even named after an ancient kingdom, but rather after the modern town of Deir Alla in Jordan. So nice little town near the river Jordan. It is written in a variant of the Ammonite script, which makes sense because Deir Alla is close to where Ammon was in antiquity. So it looks like this. This is the one that probably preserved the emphatic lateral, at least this language, not sure about the others. And yeah, this is very obscure. For a while it was classified as being Northwest Semitic, but neither Canaanite nor Aramaic. It has signs of both languages. It looks almost like a mix, as far as we can tell from the very fragmentary attestation. It looks something like a mix of Aramaic and Canaanite. So maybe it's another sign of an original dialect continuum, or it is an artificial language, some kind of artificial mix of Canaanite and Aramaic, so that speakers of both languages can understand it. Not really sure what this is. This one very hard to interpret inscription doesn't offer much material to work on. Yeah, you see, in terms of geography, it is kind of situated on the crossroads between Ammonite and Hebrew and also Aramaic. So yeah, that's what we know about this language. There was also a proposal to name this language the Gileadite language, but so far the experts are not even sure whether this is a distinct language or whatever this is. Still, let's have a short look, just a glimpse at the Deir Alla inscription. So this is what it looks like. You can see it is frustrating. There's not even a single complete line. It is broken into pieces. A lot is missing. These gaps can probably be reconstructed, but still it's a reconstruction. It's not a full text. So yeah, this inscription is dated to the early 17th century BCE. It was discovered in 1967. Yeah, the language is quite obscure, which is why I'm sorry, but I will not read Deir Alla to you, because the material is just not sufficient to do something. I just found it too hard to work on. Maybe it'll get its own video in the future, some kind of Deir Alla special, but for today I will leave you with the mystery and the obscurity of the language of the Deir Alla inscription. And after this obscure and frustrating Deir Alla inscription, we get to Phoenician, which is a very well attested Canaanite dialect. It is by far the best attested, at least epigraphic Canaanite dialect, so probably not as well attested as Hebrew, which has the Tanakh as its corpus, but among these other languages like Edomite, etc., with its approximately 10,000 inscriptions, it is quite well attested over a vast geographic area, including Punic, and a very long time frame of more than 1,000 years. So there is Phoenician and there's Punic. It's basically the same language, but at some point Punic started developing in its own way and becoming different from what we call Phoenician proper. So on this map you see the area of Phoenician proper, so non-Punic Phoenician, and it was attested from the 12th century BCE until the 2nd century CE, whereas Punic, which was spoken in northern Africa and the Phoenician colonies there, is attested a little later from the 8th century BCE, but also the attestation ended later, namely in the 6th century CE. And after the destruction of Carthage in the mid-2nd century BCE, after that we call it Late Punic, and Late Punic started to differ a lot more from Standard Phoenician or from Phoenician proper, and it was under heavy influence from Berber and Latin, and maybe Greek to a lesser extent. Phoenician proper itself can also be divided into two dialects, namely Biblian and Standard Phoenician. So Biblian attested in the city of Byblos, and Standard Phoenician in the other cities like Tyre and Sidon. So just another map. So on this map you see the area of Punic in northern Africa, southern Spain, the Balearian Islands, Sardinia, Sicily, Malta, etc. But in general, Phoenician Punic, other than the other languages that were in this video that were associated with kingdoms like Moab and Edom, etc., Phoenician is not associated with a single unified state, so there was no country named Phoenicia, but there were independent Phoenician city-states that where Phoenician was spoken, namely Tyre, known as Tsur in Phoenician, Sidon, known as Zidun, and Byblos, known as Gubal in Phoenician. And also, of course, in North Africa, for example, probably the most famous and also the largest Punic-speaking city in Northern Africa, Carthage, known as Qarthadasht in Punic, and also Lepsis Magna, known as Lapqi in Punic, etc. So this is my example for a Phoenician proper today, namely the Pergai or Pergi tablets. I'm not sure how to pronounce them in English. They are dated to circa 500 BCE and were found in Italy near an ancient Etruscan city that is also mentioned in this text. Yeah, it is bilingual, so it is written in Phoenician and Etruscan. You see the first two tablets on the right are written in Etruscan, which I will not talk about in this video because first of all it's not Semitic and I don't know it. And the third tablet is written in Phoenician. The text is more or less the same. It is a dedicatory text, and this text belongs to a new temple that was built and dedicated to the goddess known as Ashtart in Phoenician or Uni in Etruscan. And these tablets were discovered in 1964. So here you see the Phoenician. There are a few word dividers in this text, but only a few, not really systematically. So in my idealized Unicode representation of this text, I didn't use the word dividers. Instead, I used spaces that aren't actually there, but that I put into the text to facilitate reading. Yeah, let's go and have a look at the transliteration first. So here you see the 11 lines of that Phoenician portion, or the Phoenician tablet of these Pergi tablets, the idealized Unicode text, and the transliteration. And again, if you know Hebrew, you will recognize words like Asher, Kadosh, and maybe a couple of other words, Melech again, etc. So yeah, one thing that is interesting, there's a numeral sign here. This is the sign for number 3, but the number 3 is also spelled before that. You can see it, reminds you of Hebrew shalosh, for example. So this is what it looks like. And on the next slide, I will show you my vocalization and read it to you, and also including the translation, of course. And now, other than the other Canaanite dialects I showed you before, Phoenician is attested over a long time and thus has changed, and we have some evidence for the changes that took place, mostly through Greek and Latin representation of Phoenician material and Phoenician representations of Greek and Latin material. So we can figure out some consonant mergers that took place and some vowel changes that took place. So first of all, it is Canaanite, and it took part in the Canaanite vowel shift, which means long A became O. Actually, in Phoenician, it seems like long O also became U in most words. Apart from that, also stressed short A became O. So the word lady here, you would expect something like rabat or ribat, but it actually seems like it became ribot in Phoenician. Yeah, and apart from that, there's one consonant merger that also happened in Phoenician, apparently quite early, namely Shin and Samech became identical, and apparently became identical to Greek sigma and Latin S. So, which is why, for example, the word for 3, which is on the next slide, wasn't pronounced shalush, but probably more like salus. Okay, without further ado, let me read this to you and then read it again line by line or chunk by chunk and give you the translation. So, liribot liastart osser qidis esde ispaol we isyitin tiberio welyanas malka al kaisriya biyirah zdibah sams bimiton a bit. Wabano, and here the sentence will continue on the next slide. So, li ribot li Astart, to Lady Astart. Osar Qiddis Esde, this holy place. And you can see it looks like the Zai or Zion in Phoenician became some kind of inverted affricate. We see much more evidence for that in late Punic, but so this word is written Aleph Zion, but was probably pronounced as De. Okay, we see the same in the word for sacrifice, Zdibah. So this is Hebrew Asher, Paol, which was made, is Yitin, and which was given. And then here we have an Etruscan name, Tiberiuelianus, Malk Al, who reigns or who is king over Caesarea. So this is an Etruscan city. In Latin it's known as Caere, but the Etruscan name, and the Phoenician text has the Etruscan name is Caesarea. Biyirah Zdibah Sams, in the month of the sacrifice to the sun, Bimiton Ebet, as a gift in the temple. And then Wabano, he built what? We need to read the next lines to find out. Wabano tau keastart aros badi limolki sanut salus biyirah kurar biyum qibar ilim wisanut limu is ilim bibeti sanut kumu hakku kubim ille. And that's the whole text. So he built Tau, an edicula, ke Astart aros badi, as Astart asked from him. Limolki, to reign, Sanud Salus, for 3 years. Biyirah Kurar, from the month of Kurwar, so some kind of Etruscan month. Biyum Qibar Ilim, from the day of the burial of the gods. With Sanud Limu is Ilim Bibeti, and the years during which the gods are in his temple, Sanud Kumu Hakku Kubim Ille, shall be as many years as these stars. And you have now witnessed a Phoenician text in standard Phoenician. Next, I want to show you some late Punic, but before I show you the text, I need to give you some basic info on late Punic orthography. So late Punic apparently went through a lot of sound changes. The most striking change was the loss of pharyngeal and glottal consonants. So Aleph, He, Heith, Ayin all became silent, and at some point were used to represent vowels, and were quite consistently used to represent vowels in Latin and Greek and other non-Semitic names. And at some point, late Punic was also written in Latin and much less frequently in Greek. And thus we differentiate between 3 late Punic alphabets, namely Neo-Punic, Latino-Punic, and Greco-Punic. So, and if we look at, for example, Aleph, in late Punic very often we find it in the place where Phoenician originally had Aleph or the glottal stop, but then again it is also very often used to represent vowels. So very systematically in Greek and Latin words, but at some point also in actual Punic or Semitic words. And we find it in places where we wouldn't expect it in other Semitic languages. So Aleph mostly represented the vowels O and E. Then we have Bet, which apparently sometimes became spirantized, and in Latino Punic texts is then written with an F. Then we have Gimel and Dalet. He usually represents A. Wow pretty much stayed the same. Zayin, it was often written with a SD or double S or single S in Latin. It looks like the original affricate Z became some kind of inverted affricate Zd, which the Latin spelling as SD is a good sign for, but it seems like sometimes it just merged with Samech, just became a plain S, and is even written with a Samech in some New Punic texts. Unfortunately, we don't have this in any of the Greco-Punic texts because Greco-Punic is very scarcely attested. So Hate just became A. Teth was represented with a normal T in Latin, which is because it was not aspirated, so it was either still emphatic t or ta, or maybe just an unaspirated t sound, like the letter T in Italian or French. Yod, nothing special there. Kaf was written CH, sometimes H. In Latino-Punic, the H was probably when it was spirantized to H. It was usually written He. In Greco-Punic, then Lamed is just an L sound. And let's look at the rest of the letters on the next slide. So nothing special about Mem, nothing special about Nun, also nothing special about Samech. Ayin also became a vowel sound, so mostly representing A, sometimes E. Pe, interestingly, is always written F, also at the beginning of words in Latino-Punic texts, so it looks like it became spirantized just totally in every position, so it became Fe everywhere. Then we have Sadi, the emphatic S, which was written in many different ways in Latino-Punic, so sometimes just S, S with a diagonal stroke, TS, ST, double S, and yeah, it looks like it represented Ts, or an inverted affricate St, and at some point I think the S spelling occurs late, so I think later it just merged with the normal S sound. Then we have Kop or Kof, which was written as a C in Latin, Kappa in Greek. Might have just become an unaspirated K sound. Nothing special about Resh. So Sheen apparently became S, though Latin and Greek don't even have a letter for a sh sound, but they could have come up with something, just like Latino-Punic came up with a special sign for the Sadi. So yeah, it probably merged, and there were puns that about the merger of Sheen and Samech, so this is probably what happened. And the last letter, Tau, was represented as a TH in Latin because it is aspirated, and likewise theta or ancient theta in Greek. So not sure whether it became spirantized at some points, but the spelling in Latino-Punic and Greco-Punic probably just indicates the fact that it was aspirated and not unaspirated like the teeth. Okay, so short, hopefully concise explanation on late Punic orthography. Let's look at some text in late Punic, which means written in Neo-Punic, Latino-Punic, and Greco-Punic. First of all, Neo-Punic, so in the Phoenician script, though in reality the style of the Neo-Punic alphabet was quite different from this Unicode Phoenician script, but this is just like, again, an idealized representation. Okay, and here you see the transliteration. Again, you can recognize things like if you know Hebrew, this is Ares, earth, and here you see the root kadosh, so having to do with holy or something being consecrated or something. And we have some Latin words and Latin names, like this word etc. And you see the e at the beginning is written with a ayin. The a at the end is also written with a ayin. There is an n before the d, which is not there in Latin, so it's not exendra but etc in Latin. And I don't know why it is there. It maybe it indicates that this dalet is actually pronounced dalet and not the. Maybe it became the in other positions in Punic. I'm not sure about this. And there are some Latin names here. This is Candido or Candidus in proper Latin, but more like Candido in this text. And here you see Abdemelkart and Shama, to listen. Okay, let's look at the vocalization and the translation of this very short dedicatory text in late Punic, written in Neo Punic. So let me read the whole thing to you first. Ladun leel konarts bano wiktes et exedra wet orfatsot betatsotim betom candido benanno benabt melkart ki samo kulo barako. And especially that formula at the end seems to be very typical for Neo-Punic. So, bit by bit. Ladun leel, for the Lord El. Ko narts, the creator of earth. Bano uikdes, has built and consecrated. Et exedra, what orfatsot, the exedra and this portico. Betatzotim, betom, completely on his own expense. Candido benanno benabdimelkart. So Candidus, the son of Candidus, the son of Hanno, the son of Abdimelkart. Ki samo kulo barako, because he heard his voice and blessed him. And that, my dear viewers, is a late Punic dedicatory text. The next one is Latino-Punic, so this is not a transliteration, this is how it was actually written in the Latin alphabet. It looks kind of odd, and you can see they used Roman numbers, of course, and maybe you recognize a couple of things. So for example, the first line has a verb made, and you see in Latino-Punic it starts with fel. So this is actually, in Arabic you would say fa'ala. Okay, looks interesting, doesn't it? Still a little difficult to see the Semitic in this Latin text, so let me add a transliteration. So you can see what I've done here is I've transliterated the Latino-Punic into what it would be transliterated if it were written in the Phoenician alphabet. So you can see Fal is transliterated as a P ayin lamed because it was Pa'al at some point. Okay, so now let me read this to you. First the whole thing and then chunk by chunk. Fal tebur likini pisu libetim lisnim wilestim wilesarunu bin sanu sabim warbo falo. Okay, this is an odd sounding Semitic language, I think, but as I said, it was heavily influenced by Latin phonology, probably also by Berber phonology, and the loss of the pharyngeal and glottal sounds makes it sound different from stereotypic Semitic languages. So, chunk by chunk. Fel tebur. So, somebody made this grave. Licini Piso, so Licinius Piso, Latin name. Libetim lisnim. So if we have y here, like in this word and this, it was probably schwa, so this is t, and this is libetim. And you see, libetim is, in Hebrew you would say le'avotho, so for his parents. Lisnim, snim is shenayim, so for his two parents. Willistim, and for his wife. And you see Willistim, in Hebrew you would say Wule Ishto. Okay, and the O, the suffix pronoun, third person masculine singular, is very often an M in Punic. So here you see it as em and here as im. Willistim, his wife. Willis Sarunu, and for Sarunu, probably a Berber name. Bin Sanu Sabim Warbo, aged 74 years, so literally a son of 74 years. This is also what you said in other ancient Semitic languages. And then finally, a formula that, as far as I understand, was adopted from Roman inscriptions. Felo, he made it. So fel is he made, and felo, he made it. So sometimes the third person masculine singular pronoun is o. Sometimes it's im, sometimes it's o. It seems like it's mostly im if it is genitive and o when it's accusative, but not consistently. Okay, So this is a Latino-Punic inscription. And the next one will be Greco-Punic. So Greco-Punic, you see, this is written in Greek letters. Again, it looks kind of odd from a Semiticist or a Semitic standpoint. So again, let me add a transliteration into properly written Phoenician. This should make it a little easier to identify words and to read it. So let me read the whole thing to you. Ladun lebal, amun, uluribaton tinit fanebal, isnador sosipatros, benzopyros, samo kulo barako. Okay, and you recognize the last sentence. We had that in the Neo-Punic inscription, because he heard his voice and blessed him. Okay, but from the beginning. Ladun lebal amun, to the Lord Baal Amun. U, liribaton, and to Our Lady. Okay, so ribaton is to lady, and then the suffix Our Lady, liribaton, tinit, fanebal. So tinit, fanebal, this was her title, Face of Baal, but as far as I understand, tinit is mostly mentioned with this kind of a cognomen, or whatever you want to call it, tinit fanebal. Is Nador, which vowed, Sosipatros ben Zopyros, so Sosipatros, the son of Zopyros, Greek names, and then the formula that you've already heard, Samo Kulo Barako, because he heard his voice and blessed him. And that is a late Punic text written in Greek letters, Greco-Punic, and we only have, I think, there are just 5 known inscriptions of a late Punic written in Greek. The vast majority is written in the Punic script or Latin. And that was late Punic. Which means I'm done with this video for today. I hope you enjoyed it. The next video will be on Aramaic with samples, probably Old Aramaic, official Aramaic, and then maybe something from the Targums and Syriac, and maybe something more niche like Palmyrene or Nabatean or something like that. So stay tuned and keep your eyes open for my next videos.